It's game day, North Carolina versus Duke, with two coaches early on in their careers. As we prepare for a massive showdown inside the Smith Center tonight, what exactly is it that's making year three a smashing success for Hubert Davis?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Saturday, February 3rd, 2024. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade. Great to be with you. As always, want to thank you everydayers in particular for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or watch to get your Carolina content every day. This bonus episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you are brand new to the show or aren't part of it yet, I'd love to encourage you to join our Locked On Tar Heels Discord community. Come for the Tar Heels, stay for the cord. Man, it's awesome. We have a blast in there. The live game thread is going to be going off tonight. You don't want to miss it. It's free, and the link is in the show notes. By the way, it is game day, and as you know, we will have a live postcast immediately after the game tonight. Coach Pat Kilby will be joining me for that. We had two shows yesterday on Friday, a crossover with Locked On Blue Devils' own JJ Jackson, a great conversation with him, and then our regular Friday show getting ready for this game as well. But today, we've got our man Brendan Marks making his Locked On Tar Heels debut. Brandon, what a guy. I love this. Brendan has covered for a while both Carolina and Duke, so brings a very unique perspective to this conversation in these games. And now, my man has ascended to covering college basketball at the national level. Brendan, congrats on that. You are killing it. My man, keep it going.
I appreciate you. No, it's been a fun season, crazy season. And, these games are always my favorite. This is like Christmas for me. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man, I woke up and set out some milk and cookies, and it was a good day. So, Brendan, before we get to this game specific, I want to zoom out and just kind of retake some stock of the shape of both of these programs, because it's really interesting, some of the parallels that are going on. First, starting with the Carolina side of it, this is round 3 for Hubert Davis. It's hard to believe that it's already been 2+ years now. And look, while there are still literally exactly half the ACC regular season to go, season 3 is going infinitely more smoothly than did seasons 1 or 2. So, Brendan, let's rewind back to the offseason. What did you make of this retooled roster? And thinking about that, are the results kind of better than, on par with, or worse than you anticipated?
Yeah, I give Hubert Davis and his staff a lot of credit for the way that they went into this offseason. I think that he was pretty brutally honest when he looked in the mirror. I mean, I think the self-scout that he did on his roster, he looked at it and he said, okay, what are the two things that really hurt us the most in year 2? And it was, we didn't have enough three-point shooting, and offensively, we didn't have enough ball movement. Second worst three-point shooting team in UNC history, fewest assists in a season since that became a counted stat in North Carolina. And so, you look at those things, and I thought that he targeted those areas very wisely and then went out and specifically added guys who would bring those two things to the table. You bring in Harrison Ingram, can do both. You bring in Cormac Ryan, who can do both. You bring in Elliot Cadeau, who is, the pass first point guard that I think UNC fans have been waiting for. He's like the prince who was promised. And so I think he brought in all of those guys. And quite frankly, I expected this team to play a lot of games in the 80s, which it has. But I did not think that they would be able to gel and perform at the defensive level they have. So in that sense, I think they've probably even been better than I expected. And like you mentioned, halfway through the ACC schedule, I do think there's still even ways that they can improve. So a lot of credit goes out to Hubert and his staff for the way that they set up year 3.
Yeah, I think, Brendan, the really interesting takeaway from me there is the self-scout that you talked about, like that, because so many people have so many blind spots. And it's the difference in those who are willing to look at those and reckon with them, and those that are like, no, that's not a thing. And we just keep, business as usual. So, man, I'm right with you. Kudos to this staff for saying, hey, we're not doing it. How do we start doing it? And they have, and it's grown better. Now, you just mentioned that defensive adjustments and how that's grown beyond most people's wildest imagination. My friend, you wrote a fantastic breakdown of that just a couple weeks ago for The Athletic. Folks, if you haven't checked that out, you need to make sure you do so. We'll link that, by the way, in the show notes if you want to go read it. But just detailing these defensive adjustments, great video support for it, following those back-to-back losses to UConn and Kentucky. So, Brendan, my question for us to consider then is this. That's been in place now for 10, 11 games. And so offenses and opponents are getting more and more tape and are ultimately going to begin to adjust. And just like a batter and a pitcher, it's all about who makes the next move, who can anticipate and adjust before the other. So for Carolina, as opponents begin to adjust to these new defensive wrinkles, what is the next move for the Tar Heels? Or perhaps are these updated principles effective enough to withstand whatever other teams might throw at them?
Yeah, I do think, just for starters, the defensive adjustments that they made were not necessarily what I would call wholesale changes.
Yep.
It wasn't like they said, all right, we've been doing this. None of it is working. We're completely abandoning it. And I will say and Harrison Ingram has talked about this a couple of times, about 5 games into the season, some of the things UNC was doing, like we saw last season when they were switching 1 through 5, it put Armando Bacot in some tough situations, especially given his injuries. And so they changed things. But really, it's been more tweaks and tightening lately, small things. So, like in ball screen coverages, for example, playing the screener's defender, usually Armando Bacot, a little bit higher. And he has shown much better mobility this season. He's lost a little bit of weight, and that has been much more effective for UNC. Basically, anytime UNC can force the opponent to take a mid-range 2-pointer, that is a 1 defensive possession, even if the ball goes in the basket.
Yes.
So I think that those sorts of tweaks are definitely sustainable. As far as moving forward, though, there are things that UNC is continuing to experiment with. There are still things that they're coming into their own with. I think a great example of this is Elliot Cadeau. Early in the season, not to be mean to Elliot, it was pretty tough to have him on the court for too long at a time because he was either fouling or was a complete non-entity defensively. And starting with the NC State game, he has done a 180. I mean, he has looked so much better, has been so much better chasing over screens, so much better at being straight up and down. So I do think that guys are still continuing to make individual tweaks. And then the last thing I would say is teams are going to get more tape on UNC. They are continuing to get more tape on them. But the thing that this team has that years 1 and years 2 under Hubert did not is they have versatility. So they can play 3 guards together, and RJ and Seth and Elliot can work. You can play Armando and Jalen Washington together now if you're playing an especially big team. So Jalen Withers is a guy who I think, and we'll talk more about the specific matchup tonight, but I think he has an opportunity to be a huge piece defensively tonight. So the versatility, I think, is what allows UNC to continue adapting. Combined with those tweaks, I don't really see this defense dropping off.
Yeah, and you combine all that with how experienced and veteran this team is, save for obviously Zayden and Elliot. And man, you got a world of versatility. Let's keep that Swiss Army knife going. Now, Brendan, obviously, it's not just the improved D. There are other things that have allowed this team to flourish and perform better than the previous 2 regular seasons. So outside of the defense, I'd love for us to each pick one thing that has allowed this season to be as successful as it has. Defense is off limits, though. You go first.
Okay, defense being off limits. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things has been the pace. And I'm sure UNC, I've heard this from UNC fans most of the season, like this looks like Carolina basketball again. Yeah. Being over at Duke earlier this week, talking to John Scheyer, talking to Duke's players, you ask them what's different from UNC this year. It's the pace. It's the pace the Tar Heels play at. Yeah. And I think that doing that, it really just accentuates UNC's skills and the skill sets of its players. Like last season, this is a great point. Cormac Ryan last season, I know he hasn't necessarily been the 3-point marksman that UNC fans thought he would be. He's still been great. But last year, he was best. His best offense of any action was in transition, sprinting to the right corner. You know what he does a lot right now? That exactly. And so I think that having Elliot, having the number of guys they do who can push the ball ahead, having guys who can make threes, having guys who, once you close out on them, because you do have to respect them, could get inside. The pace to me is just really something that I've been impressed with. It's been fun to watch again. So if I can't go with the defense, that's the thing that I would say I've enjoyed personally probably the most.
Yeah, I love that. For me, I'm gonna go with the backcourt role definition. With RJ and Caleb, who are both flourishing immensely right now. Both showed up. I love it on the top 10 Jerry West watch list this week. It's great to see. But there just always felt like that tug and pull, that tension of who's the one, who's the two, and it just really feels like Elliot and RJ both understand and accept that more. And I think that definition is really allowing things to pop off in different ways. And then how that then drops down trickle effect to Harrison and Cormac and Mondo, and then Seth and the Jaelens when they come in as well.
Jalen squared.
Yeah, J2. And so, yeah, I'm going to go with the backcourt role definition for my answer on that one, Brendan. All right, last thing on this conversation. Now, we've talked about that it's been the best regular season thus far for Hubert Davis. As we've said, we're only halfway through the ACC slate. There are 10 more games, and oh boy, this schedule gets a lot more difficult going forward. So, Brendan, being at the exact middle of conference play, what's one thing we would like to see Carolina improve on as a team or as an individual, whichever you want to go with, in the back half of ACC play?
Yeah, the thing that to me, and it kind of relates back to what we were saying earlier, I expected this team to play a lot of games in the 80s. And, quite frankly, the offense has taken a little bit of a step back. And that's not just including the Georgia Tech game. I think the biggest reason why is shot selection. I really do. So I would like to see the offense continue to be more efficient in getting to the looks that it was thriving with earlier in the year. Armando Bacot, I think, is a guy who Hubert Davis has mentioned this week. He's doing a lot of things to impact the game. He's setting great screens. He's rebounding. His passing, again, the defense that he's been playing this season, he's been much, much better. But I think he can be much more aggressive offensively. And North Carolina having that true interior scoring threat, UNC's top 50 in free throw rate nationally, that's been a huge part of this offense. And getting back to really feeding the post, prioritizing that. I think sometimes guys have fallen a little bit in love with some long twos rather than some threes and passing it and getting it back. So the shot selection, I think, to me is the thing that I'm looking to see if it can improve. You and I were talking about this off the air, but since the Syracuse game, UNC is outside of the top 75 nationally in terms of adjusted offensive efficiency. So they're still winning games because of the defense and because RJ Davis is, turned into, a nuclear energy. He's like Klay Thompson right now. But they need to get back to the overall shot selection that they were showing earlier in this winning streak, I think, to probably continue at the rate that they've been on in conference play.
I love it. That was going to be my answer as well. So I'll just drill down on it then, I guess, I thought for the first time in a while that big stretch in the second half of the Georgia Tech game where the Tar Heels really were settling. You talked about those long, inefficient twos. That was part of that equation that you didn't see when things early in that Georgia Tech game felt easy and normal and getting those shots. And so I think it is spot on with what you hammered on there, Brendan, of like, it's got to be not just offensive efficiency, but a critical part of that is shot selection. And some of that, I think I would go even another direction with it as well to say, you talked about Cormac, man. I think when he can get locked in and get up consistently over 30% from deep, that's just going to catapult this team into another tier of what the ceiling or the roof, to use MJ's phrases, could be. And maybe that's Elliot finding a little bit more of his own shot beyond getting to the rim, which he's been doing so well lately as well.
Totally.
Well, Brendan, both Carolina and Duke are going through a brand new era. It's wild to see these two teams paralleling each other in that way. What exactly is it like to follow a legend? Well, Brendan's been a big part of following that journey for both programs. So we'll get into it in just a second. Right after I tell you that this episode's brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, placing some prop bets. Like, I don't know, how long's the national anthem going to be? I love those. But FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, 49ers favored by 1.5 right now at FanDuel, by the way, but they also have bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. So new customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Whether you are in Chapel Hill or Durham, it is a new era. Brendan, it is wild to me that two of the, what I would call, four biggest programs in the entire landscape of D1 college basketball and its current 362 members, so closely located to each other, went through coaching changes within a season of each other. You have had a front row seat to both of those. What was it like, Brendan, to cover both of these changeovers?
Man, it was a long 2 years, I'll tell you that. But no, it was awesome to have a front row seat. I mean, I think, for both UNC and Duke fans, that was always the old parlor game, right? It was, when are they stepping away and who's gonna succeed them? So I think, they obviously came about very differently. I will say this, for Roy Williams, he has talked a couple of times, and he mentioned when he stepped away that it was, I'm stepping away. And I know a lot of people want to talk about kissing the court and all that, but that's a thing. It is a thing. But I think comparatively to the Duke side of things, there were a lot of rumors for a number of seasons that Coach K was getting down towards the end. Yeah. You had heard it on the recruiting trail that, recruits are asking, hey, if I come, do I know that I'm going to be playing for you? And so that was something that had, I would say, picked up a lot more chatter on the Duke side of things than on the UNC side of things. So when Roy Williams says, like, I decided that was it and I stepped away, again, I don't know that it was quite that quick, but it was pretty quick. On the Duke side of things, I do think it was more calculated. I've written a couple of stories about how that whole process played out. It was more calculated, I think. Obviously, the way that the coaches went about it were entirely different. It was very jarring, seeing how different that was. Seeing Roy Williams, I remember, I think the first time it really struck me was Hubert's first season going down to play College of Charleston. Hubert's basically his first real road game. And Roy's up in the stands. And it was just so strange to me that he would, I assumed he'd be at the home games, but that he was traveling too. And it was like, really? Like, okay. And I'm feeling for poor Wanda, who has got to be the most educated basketball fan in the entire world.
That's right.
Versus obviously the Coach K situation, he's now been to, you can count on one hand the number of games that he's been to since he retired. So
there's the Notre Dame game, and I'm trying to think of when,
he was at one earlier this year. I think he was at Arizona, but again,
right.
Very, very, very few. And so it's been interesting to see the difference there. And obviously, the fact that it happened so close to each other, it's just, until I take a step back, it doesn't really hit me just how, wild that 2 seasons was.
Yeah. Wow. What I love, look, we're early in both these guys' careers. As we said, it's year 3 for Hubert Davis, year 2 for Jon Scheyer. They have gone through something that so few people in this world will ever do, replacing 2 honest to goodness legends of the sport. And frankly, with all due respect to Coach Guthridge and Coach Doherty, back-to-back legends for Hubert Davis. But there is so much respect for these 2 men. I mean, it's so clear. You even tweeted out a couple quotes from Jon Scheyer about Hubert Davis, from Hubert Davis about Jon Scheyer, because they've gone through something similar together, because they are good and kind men. And because honestly, Brendan, for me on the outside looking into what they're doing, I think they both believe in what each other's doing at their respective programs. So let's look ahead then a little bit. Are these the 2 men to lead these prestigious programs for the next decade plus?
I think so. In John's case at Duke, I think the administration there, the boosters there, the fans there are hoping that he's there not just for the next decade. I mean, they're hoping this is another Coach K situation. Yeah, they're hoping he's there for 30, 40 years, which is fascinating to me. But, that was the whole purpose of Duke doing things the way that they did them, with him being the coach and waiting for a year. And it was so that, can you imagine if Hubert Davis had known he was going to replace Roy Williams in that last season, if after a staff meeting, for example, Hubert could have stayed after and just said, hey, why did you bring things up in the order you did?
Yeah.
How did you decide on this idea? How do you plan X, Y, Z? And they've obviously had those conversations. But I do think Duke did have an added benefit of him being able to ask those in the moment and understanding the thought process going through a season. So certainly in Duke's case, I think they think that he's there for the long haul. And Hubert is young enough that there's no reason that he cannot be North Carolina's head coach for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he has done this season has cemented that as much as anything.
Yes.
The thing that I keep going back to, and I don't know exactly when it was, but at some point this preseason, might have even been after one of the UNC's first games. And Hubert was talking about the contract that he had last year's team write up. And basically, for anybody who's not aware, last year, early on in the season, Hubert told all the players, make a contract of sorts, make a constitution for yourselves. How do you want to play offensively? How do you want to play defensively? And basically, what are your non-negotiables? What kind of team do you want to be? And they all signed it and they brought it to him and they drafted it and they laminated it and it was in the locker room and he kept it in the office and it was this whole big deal. And somebody asked Hubert before the start of this season, did you let the players do that again? And he said, no, I made the contract this year. Somebody said, why? And he said, because I'm the head coach. And I think about that scene so frequently and the authoritativeness, like the declarative nature of that statement. It has felt so much more like his program this year. Not that it didn't the past two seasons, but it kind of, it did to me at times still feel like the substitute teacher.
That's a good word. Yeah.
It not to be disrespectful, but it is clearly his team. They play the way he wants. And it is so fascinating hearing the players now, not intentionally, but because it is ingrained into them, talking and using some of his messages. RJ Davis said at the press conference this week, previewing the Duke game, we're playing with joy. He says that all the time. And you can see that this team is playing with joy.
They are.
And so I do think these are the two guys to lead it. I think that they both understand the magnitude of the positions they're in. They are different. They have different strengths. But I do think that, hopefully this is the matchup that we see for the next at least, 10 years or so.
And that's not just good for this rivalry, man. That's good for our sport, and you love to see it. Well, Brendan, that's enough big picture talk because there is a slightly important basketball game coming up later today that we all might have heard of. What's the matchup in it that no one is talking about that might decide it? We'll talk about that and more coming up in just a second. All right, Isaac Schade joined today by Brendan Marks from The Athletic, and we got to get you ready for tonight's big-time matchup. Number 3, Carolina, hosting number 7, Duke, 6:30 Eastern on ESPN. By the way, if you haven't looked at the schedule for the entirety of today, holy cow, you're going to love it. 3 top 10 matchups, another top 10 matchup tomorrow, a great day of college basketball. FanDuel line isn't out yet as Brendan and I record, but the KenPom line has the Tar Heels favored by 6. So, Brendan, round 1 of Carolina Duke. I'm always hoping for 3, maybe even 4 of these matchups. So let's get an ACC tournament one. I don't know if my heart could handle another NCAA tournament one. The tension in that building was palpable, but it was great. So, Brendan, you tweet before we talk the game itself. You tweeted on Thursday that your mentions during a UNC Duke rivalry week are a straight up dumpster fire. I think it was that GIF of the burning dumpster fire floating down a river. Dude, yep. I need a safe for all ages example of your mentions.
Oh my gosh, man. It's I love my job. Don't let me get this twisted. But this is the week where all of the people who think that the funny thing is I am a UNC graduate. I graduated from UNC. And so to me, I always keep track of how many UNC fans versus Duke fans call me a homer. I always think it is hysterical when UNC fans think that I am biased for Duke, and then someone chimes in and says, he went there, right? But I get so many of those homer. I did have one this week that I thought that it did make me chuckle, and it's from a Twitter user who I have not blocked but muted. I like to mute people over block them. I think it's hysterical to have them screaming into the void. But one guy tweeted something along the lines of, what time are you and the Dookie bus getting there? So I always find it funny, the respective Homer counts, but
Sure.
It's all in good fun.
Oh, that's so good. Well, for what it's worth, man, I think you toe the line really well, and I'm very appreciative for the great job you do with it. So way to go. All right, Brendan, let's play a little game of fill in the blank to help us get ready for this game. The individual matchup that most favors North Carolina is
RJ Davis versus whoever's trying to defend him. Nobody has been able to fully shut RJ Davis down this season, and I don't believe that Duke, even with its depth in the backcourt, will be able to. I do think the fact that the Blue Devils have the number of guards that they do will make it easier. I think they can throw a bunch of different looks at him. Yeah. Tyrese Proctor's got a little more size. Jeremy Roach has the quickness. Jared McCain's a little stronger. Caleb Foster has size. But I do think that, at the end of the day, RJ Davis for UNC to win is going to have to be the best player on the court. And in almost every game North Carolina has played this season, he has been in that conversation.
Okay, let's flip it. And that's funny because that might be the answer. But the matchup that most favors Duke is...
Yeah, it's got to be Kyle Filipowski. As good as Armando Bacot is in the post, and I think he can hang with Kyle Filipowski there, having a 7-foot, as Hubert Davis called him this week, point guard, it's really tough to compete with that. Kyle Filipowski's playing much more at center this year. Obviously, he had Derek Lively next to him last season. The Mavericks rookie has been fantastic in the NBA so far. Armando Bacot, I thought it was fascinating, said he was the best defender that he'd played in college, which is saying something.
Yeah.
Because
he's faced a dude or two.
He's faced a few. And so I thought it was fascinating that he said that. But Filipowski, I think there's really not anything he can't do. He can score inside. He's in a little bit of a perimeter shooting slump, but he can shoot the three. And this year, especially being a 5, he's been much more of a playmaker, kind of like Armando has actually. That he's had multiple games of at least 4 assists, and he only had 1 last season. So I don't know that UNC has a great matchup for him, and I think foul trouble there is going to be something I'm monitoring.
Yeah, I mean that to me is perhaps the most important matchup. I keep thinking back to 2 years ago when my question was always, what's Carolina going to do with Paolo Banchero? And game 1, they used Bacot on him, and that went miserably for the Tar Heels.
Very badly.
Yeah, I think he had 2 fouls like a couple minutes into that game. But round 2, they went with Brady Manek, and that worked out a lot better for the Tar Heels. So really, really curious to see what happens there. I think there's some pros and cons for both teams in that flip Bacot matchup on both sides of the court. Brendan, this is a really interesting one for me that I was just kind of thinking on a couple days ago. The matchup in this game that no one is talking about but should be is...
I think it's what Duke and UNC, how they handle Mark Mitchell at Duke, which UNC fans may be like, why is that your answer? Duke is, I think, 25-2 in games in which Mark Mitchell hits double-digit points. Wow. On a team that has... that starts 3 guards with regularity, which plays 4 guards at a time sometimes, and then has Kyle Filipowski. He is essentially the lone connective tissue that Duke has. He is the guy who can defend 1 through 5. He's the guy who I would expect he's going to have turns on Harrison Ingram. He's probably going to have turns on Cormac Ryan. No. He's probably going to have turns on RJ Davis, if we're being honest. Seriously. And he has been one of the better help defenders in the country the last 2 years. So I think what UNC does with him and how it handles him is going to be huge, because when he gets in foul trouble, it just surely through roster construction forces Duke to go small. And I would be fascinated to see how UNC handles that. So I think Mark Mitchell is a guy nobody is talking about. When he is good, Duke looks like the best version of itself. When he struggles or when Duke doesn't get him involved, the offense looks stagnant, the ball sticks. So how UNC defends him, if they can take him out of the game, I think is something that's fascinating and probably not getting enough credit.
And then we'll start getting tweets from his dad again, and it'll be a whole thing. Brendan, the one I'm really, really curious about, assuming, we'll see how the matchups are and what starting lineup Duke chooses to go with, but I'm really curious to see a Cormac Ryan, Jared McCain matchup at the 3. Just knowing that Cormac has a little bit of size from a height standpoint on McCain could be really interesting. So that's one that's kind of, I think I've thought so much about the bookends, the guards and the bigs, that I've forgotten some about the wings, but I think that might be critical for it. Brendan, I'm going to skip a couple questions ahead just for time's sake here. what a treat this is going to be to get our first head-to-head matchup in the ACC Player of the Year front-runner race. Obviously, they won't be guarding each other, save for some weird switches or something. Yeah. But RJ Davis, Kyle Filipowski, man, these dudes are having years, and it is fun to watch. Who will have the bigger game between these two?
Man, first of all, I hope that they do get switched onto each other, because we need some pictures of them for all of our ACC Player of the Year stories.
That's right.
But I think it's going to be RJ Davis, because he has to have the bigger game.
That's right.
Duke has shown the ability, even when Kyle Filipowski is not at his best. He wasn't at his best against Virginia Tech earlier this week. Quite frankly, he was not nearly at his best when Duke beat Clemson last weekend. No. He made a huge play in the last 30 seconds or so, but really did not have a great game. Versus for UNC, it is really difficult for me to imagine a pathway to a North Carolina victory if RJ Davis doesn't look like himself. No. I think that, Kyle Filipowski is the guy who has been a rock for Duke, but they do have other guys who can make you pay. Jared McCain's got 20-point games. Jeremy Roach has 20-point games. Tyrese Proctor has really come on, is averaging like 17 points a game, shooting almost 50% from three the last 5 games. They have other guys who can really hurt you. UNC does. It has Armando Bacot. It has Harrison Ingram. But we haven't really seen UNC win a game so far this year where RJ Davis was not that dude. And so I think just sheerly out of necessity, I think that it's going to have to be RJ. I'm expecting both of them to have big games, but I don't know that UNC can win if he doesn't hit the 20-point mark.
Yeah, that was my exact angle on that answer as well. That's well sussed out, my friend. You talked a little bit about some of the foul problems that Flip has had lately. I believe it's his last 3 games he's had 4, 5, and 4 fouls. And Elliot Cadeau himself has had a little bit of foul trouble, particularly in the first half, although the Georgia Tech game, it was all in the second half. So, Brendan, which of these two guys can stay out of that in this game? Which player let me actually flip what I just said. Which player gets in more foul trouble in this game, Elliot Cadeau or Flip?
I think it's going to be Elliot Cadeau, because, again, it's a matter for Duke. They cannot afford for Kyle Filipowski to be on the sideline. It's just not a roster that has a ton of front court depth. Sean Stewart is a 5-star freshman. He's a great athlete, and it wouldn't shock me if he saw some minutes tonight. Ryan Young is a back to the basket, rec league Ryan is, I think, what some Duke fans call him. Really good player. He was actually Ken Palm's MVP for the Duke Virginia Tech game.
Was he really? I didn't see that.
Had one of his best games of the season. And so, but he's not Kyle Filipowski. Neither of them are Kyle Filipowski. And so I think that as much as UNC is going to go at Flip, wouldn't surprise me at all if Duke makes some adjustments, does some double teams, lets him pass out of things to try and make life easier on Flip. Yeah. And with Elliot, 5 and 7 minutes against Georgia Tech.
Yep, it was
crazy. I do think he's shown a little bit of a propensity for that. And just the number of guards Duke has, they're going to force that issue. So I think that probably Elliot is the guy who does. But the Flip situation, I think, is going to matter more, because if he gets in foul trouble versus if Armando gets in foul trouble, that's really going to, as we saw with Banchero, I thought that was a great example. It's going to really make a difference.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, I think Elliot's inexperience versus Duke's backcourt's experience could play a critical factor in that as well, of knowing what to do to kind of get him in his head a little bit on that. All right, Brendan, let's make picks on this game, and then let's get out of here. What kind of homer are you going to be?
Yeah, I get to make somebody angry regardless. It's great. So this is how I've been approaching this. To me, North Carolina's playing at home. That's a point in UNC's favor. I think on the whole, UNC is the better and deeper team this season. I think that UNC, outside of the Georgia Tech loss, has proven that it has the better defense and has the potential to beat better teams. It has a better resume than Duke has. That's true. It has the likely ACC Player of the Year in RJ Davis. It has more experience. It is an older team than Duke. All of these things point in UNC's favor, which means that I am actually going to go ahead and pick Duke, because that's how this rivalry goes. And I will say this. I think that we have seen, the stats 40, it's 52 and 48 in the last 100. It's 2 points. It's 3 points separating it here and there. The fact that Ken Palm is projecting this game to be a 6-point game, I don't really see how that's possible. I think
either way, honestly. Yeah.
I think this is a one-possession one, and quite frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if we get one of those moments that endures for a long time, because I do think these teams are pretty evenly matched, and it's strength against strength. UNC has the better defense, Duke has the better offense.
Exactly.
But just knowing the way this rivalry goes, the better team does not always win. And I think that in this case, Duke might smell some blood in the water, and I think that they might actually be able to pull the upset tonight.
All right. Yep, that's what I've been looking at too. A very close game. My prediction this weekend, so I'll just stick with it, is Carolina 72-70, winning, but not covering that spread. I've joked a couple times. Remember the Jeremy Roach layup in Cameron last year, and then talking about Carolina's lack of defensive communication after that. I don't think we would see that happening, but I do think, as you said, we will hopefully get some kind of enduring image that can just go in those annals and highlight reels for years and years to come. Brendan Marks, brother, thank you so much. I know we got to get you out of here, so let's get out of this episode of Locked on Tar Heels. Don't forget to come join the Discord. It's free to join. The link is in the show notes. We'd love to have you in there hanging out with us tonight. You can follow us on Twitter. Make sure to check out Brendan's great work for The Athletic. Very seriously, it's great stuff if you haven't read or followed him before. Subscribe on video and audio to our show. Smash the like button if you're watching on YouTube so we know you're here. And as always, it means so much if you would leave a rating and review. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk to you again tonight after the game. But until then, peace.